at the front end, at the back end, we need to be as efficient as we can. And the only way to be efficient is to get the information and look at the data that supports the decision-making of being as efficient as we can be. And does that create empowered, happy, engaged employees? Yes, it does.
Do the companies trust their own data? I think that's a big thing that we discuss at the moment, like what data governance strategies are currently in place.
New generation of digital first employee, which, you know, really wants to be able to service the customer effectively, have the right insight at the right time.
No, that's brilliant. And I'm keen to sort of just drive that conversation a bit further with you, Luke, and sort of think about what does this mean for, say, the customer service agent, Razia, that you're, you know, talking about and sort of reflecting on in that scenario. Because whilst, say, for example, having access to visual analytics and data insight whilst on the call to serve the customer is great for the customer experience, there's surely going to be a substantial amount of benefit for the employee experience at the same time. So, you know, the customer service agent in the scenario that you shared, Razia, I understand there's probably feelings of, you know, frustration and feeling incompetent to no fault of their own. So, Luke, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on what does this all mean for the employee experience alongside the customer experience?
Yeah, it's so relevant today that your employees feel the same about your organization, you know, as your customers do, because employee experience, you know, in feeling confident and engaged and empowered to be able to do their job, I think is really quite critical. You know, we talked about residential sort of customers through this, and I want to acknowledge that, you know, the C&I, corporate and industry, you know, sort of customer is really important to the utility as well. And it comes with a range of different needs. You know, they want their own portals. They want to understand what's going on from a billing point of view. But fundamentally, they want to make sure that they're getting good value for money. You know, this is a exchange of value. You know, I get electricity and I need it to do my business, but I want to make sure I'm paying the right amount of money for it. And I think there's a lot to be said about getting the right information to your frontline people to have those conversations. You know, the type of model which we're talking about, I think, has got a basis where, you know, I love what Razia said as well around the frontline having the information. And I want to acknowledge that, you know, we were in situations, and I don't want to, you know, sort of name names, but I've seen situations where, you know, you're ingesting data from the grid, which is not owned by the retailer. And that data is constantly wrong. And you're ingesting information and overriding information that you've got on customers that you've spent a lot of time getting quality on. And yet you repeated that process. So there's a real hub and spoke type of environment here where there needs to be part of the organization that's focused on what are we going to do about making sure we get a really healthy data hierarchy and set of information that's clean and healthy. And I'm talking from a engineering, you know, asset management perspective, and I'll come back to that, as well as customer facing, client facing C&I. And then how are we going to maintain that to keep it fresh and in good health? What's going to be our mandate and our cadence for ensuring that's the case? And then how are we going to have this spoke model where we're going to empower people around our organization to leverage that information and use it to benefit our business? How are we going to let finance have it? How are we going to let HR have it? How's IT going to benefit from it? How's engineering? How's our CEO on board going to use that information? How are our stakeholders going to use that to make sure our regulators, the people who do audits on us, how does all this become shareable? All these questions can be answered and can be easily, you know, this has not been done before. It's just, it seems big when you're confronted with it, but there are strategies, and through the help of people like Razia and Tableau, these things are pretty easy to put in place, but they seem complicated, right? So that's the first point. From an engineering perspective, I think what we're seeing is, I've worked with organizations that have 100-year assets. And I know we're going to replace assets. We obviously do. We've got to move from brown and black coal into something that's more sustainable. And the rest of the world will be watching us. However, we still need to maintain some of these assets that are helping us with wind and water, hydro, electricity generation, etc. And so how do we do that? Well, we need data. We need analytics, predictive analytics, because we need to be able to visualize those things. And from an engineering point of view, plan our maintenance cadence. This is all about efficiencies. Joe said it, all about efficiencies at the front end, at the back end. We need to be as efficient as we can. And the only way to be efficient is to get the information and look at the data that supports the decision-making of being as efficient as we can be. And does that create empowered, happy, engaged employees? Yes, it does.
That's absolutely fantastic. I think really what jumps out at me here is the elephant in the room, which we've skirted around a couple of times, and that's this issue of trust. The fourth D that sometimes is thrown in, which I didn't mention earlier, is the concept of democratization. So how do you, in this new two-sided energy paradigm, where the customer, be that a residential consumer or a C&I customer, the customer is at the heart of a new participatory energy market. No longer the big one-way flow of generation from large-scale fossil fuel generators out to the ratepayer or the NIMI. It's now about having an active engagement from a consumer. Well, that consumer or prosumer, if you like, is going to be much more dynamically engaged in the energy market. And you have to take a little bit of a pause there, because you think, well, at the moment, there isn't much sign of that. You've got consumers who are quite distant in terms of their involvement with their energy provider. And you've got an uptake of distributed energy generation, rooftop solar, which is often driven by this desire to take back control. But at the same time, that's not a desire to suddenly open up and let the utility come in and start making decisions, on my behalf. If we're to crack these issues about the reliability and the resilience of a modern energy network, then we have to persuade the consumer of the benefit of them playing that active role, and that will require a third party to have an element of control over these assets that they've just invested in. There's an awful lot of trust involved in that. Or as I've heard it described, really brilliantly, a social license to automate. Because let's be frank, a lot of these new services will be highly automated, highly AI driven. So that requires a huge degree of trust to be built up with the consumer. So, I think, what I loved about what's, the examples that were shared there was, you're looking at really enabling that level of trust, both within the employee base, but within the customer base as well. And through doing that, you're enabling new business models that will impact. And one that jumps out to me, for example, on the C&I side is, really sort of potentially across the board is, trust is going to be enabled by that that absolute confidence in fair value exchange for participating. So new value pools that are emerging in energy for a C&I customer to make use of its estate on-site battery storage, both for energy arbitrage purposes, but also to provide services into flexibility markets. So, if we can achieve a balancing of this new intermittent network by businesses and individuals agreeing to sort of adjust their demand to provide a balancing service, they need to be compensated, and they need to have an absolute level of trust that that's going to be accurate and timely compensation. So I think those emerging business models around that, and one final one on the subject of equity in the transition is, a lot of these sort of 3 million rooftop solar investments, of course, are higher socioeconomic groups that can afford, homeowners that can afford to invest in the battery and solar upfront capital expenditure, if you like. Well, how are we going to make this sort of thing much more democratized again in terms of access for lower socioeconomic groups, for renters, and really ensure everybody's got a stake in this energy transition? So I think that's absolutely sort of fundamentally important. You see really interesting business models emerging around energy as a service, and and organizations who would be willing to basically invest ahead and reduce the capex requirement on the end user, on the understanding that they are able to control devices and storage requirements and actually play an active participatory role in flexibility markets. So and take away the operational risk as well. So the consumer's not owning the asset, and they're not, they're setting certain criteria around the operation, but then they're enabling a trusted third party to act on their behalf. So I think really interesting new business models emerging, but it's all based on trust. It's based upon democratization. I think it's an incredibly exciting time.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I personally love your use of the word democratization. And I believe that it should officially become the 4 Ds, not the 3 Ds on that basis. Some key messages from you there, Joe. Certainly one around trust. And not only trust for the customer and the employee cohorts, but also for shareholders, to have confidence that, as an organization, you're heading in the right direction and you can not only survive the disruption that's happening, but thrive beyond it. And I also love your reference around sort of ensuring that the energy transition is inclusive, which then leads into conversations surrounding affordability and accessibility. I think that's a really key point and certainly deserves its own standalone conversation. I am mindful of time, and Razia, I'd love to hear your views and perspectives and perhaps advice to executives when they start to think about embracing democratization of data to create value across their organization.
Yeah, I actually want to also just expand on what Joe said about trust. Trust also goes to, do the companies trust their own data? I think that's a big thing that we discuss at the moment, like what data governance strategies are currently in place within all the different organizations. Is the data certified? Do they have warnings based on the data? Is the data sensitive information that can't be shared through different departments? So it's really important to have that data trust within an organization as well. I've heard from, my customers saying that they don't actually use the data because they don't trust it. So they're left blind in certain areas because they only use the data that they have access to. They don't combine it with additional data. So trust is a big factor in terms of, data governance and data strategies that companies have in place as well. And also, I guess to answer your question, Sally, I think my advice is to really, to have that data trust and governance in place, instill a data culture within the organizations, and to foster that culture for decision making purposes, right? It can be a daunting task on where to start, how to make the shift. How do we have an analytics strategy in place? How do we have data governance in stage? And Tableau actually can provide that. Tableau has got a step-by-step methodology that combines, our company expertise along with best practices of thousands of Tableau customers that can help organizations actually address those questions and become more data-driven. And basically it provides the companies tools to define where they want to go, who do they actually want to involve, and also how do they develop the critical capabilities that are needed to actually make it happen. And again, it's really crucial that data is accessible to everybody. There's absolutely no point having volumes and volumes of data if it actually isn't available to the right people who make those business decisions. Data-driven companies also need to ensure that their data is consolidated, right? To keep it continuously up to date so that employees have access to the most current information at any point in time. And that actually means eliminating the data silos and equipping and empowering all employees with data. And lastly, it's really important to build a data community within an organization, not just for customer success and customer retention, but also for employee success as well. We want to be able to make people within an organization trust their data and also assist them with using that data to align their business goals and activities.
I'm mindful of time, but a huge thank you to all of you for creating such a valuable discussion today. I think certainly the key takeaways are we've certainly unpacked the key drivers of disruption across utility markets, the role of real-time data insight in not only enabling utility organisations to survive, but also to thrive throughout the transformation that is unfolding across the sector. And thank you to yourself, Razia, for unpacking practical pillars of data maturity and building data maturity across the utility organisation, and importantly, the role of executives and leadership in navigating both the challenges and the opportunities that are being presented by the transformation that's unfolding across utility markets globally. So thank you very much to all of you, our panellists today, for joining this discussion, and thank you to our audience for connecting. We will be in touch with you to provide more information about this utility industry leadership panel series with Tableau on the Reboot Show, and we look forward to seeing you on the next segment.
Squeezed margins on what was traditionally a commodity business.
Awaken the giant within. And that giant within, to use Anthony Robbins' quote, is data.
360 view of that data, to have a single source of truth where all of the data from the different systems is actually consolidated.
Customers are actually wanting to engage more with their utility provider because they perceive them to be, a trusted advisor.
So huge new competitive pressures from organisations that have that that data-driven culture.
Said that data-driven organizations are 23 times more likely to acquire customers and 6 times more likely to retain customers.
It's very hard to uncouple the data from those very cluttered systems that have been in place for quite some time.
We believe that all of the data we have is in the Excel spreadsheets that we've populated it in, which is not the case, as you're highlighting.
At the front end, at the back end, we need to be as efficient as we can. And the only way to be efficient is to get the information and look at the data that supports the decision-making of being as efficient as we can be. And does that create empowered, happy, engaged employees? Yes, it does.
Do the companies trust their own data? I think that's a big thing that we discuss at the moment, like what data governance strategies are currently in place.
New generation of digital first employee, which really wants to be able to service the customer effectively, have the right insight at the right time.